GoForThe2.com in with the Week 11 predictions. Let's jump right into it for the college football season. Big Ten battle, Nebraska and Minnesota. Nebraska coming off a disappointing 31-24 home loss to Northwestern. I was on the Wildcats. They didn't disappoint. 3 straight overtime wins by Northwestern. First time in FBS history. But I was very impressed with the Nebraska offense in the home loss. They were able to rush for 112 yards on the ground, up against a very solid Northwestern front seven that entering that ballgame was only allowing 94.8 rushing yards to opposing offenses. More importantly, over the last 4 games for Nebraska, in games against Wisconsin, Purdue, Ohio State, and Northwestern, in terms of a passing offense, they've been very prolific. They're averaging 319 passing yards per game during that stretch, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. You look at that quarterback, Tanner Lee, he's completing 56% of his passes, 2,356 yards, 17 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. But more importantly, when you look at the last 4 games, Nebraska beat Purdue 25-24, but the 3 games that they lost, Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Northwestern, those teams are a combined 22-5 overall, or an 814 winning percentage. To put up that type of productivity against those solid defenses, to me, will carry through this weekend against a beat-up Minnesota team. Both teams are 4-5 overall. They need to win this game to become bowl eligible, or one step closer to becoming bowl eligible. And you look at Minnesota, back-to-back games now against Iowa and Michigan. They've been beat up in both ball games. Last week I was on Michigan. They didn't disappoint. They got a dominating 33-10 home win over Minnesota. They rushed for 371 rushing yards in that ball game. They dominated the front seven. Now Minnesota has to go back home to face another blue-collar team in Nebraska. More importantly, you look at the passing offense of Minnesota over the last 3 games. They've completed 19 of 56 passes. That's 33%, 260 total passing yards during the stretch. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. They're going up against a balanced offense in Nebraska. I think Nebraska does have the better head coach in Mike Riley. I think they're the more complete team, and I do feel that they get a convincing 10-point road win over Minnesota, 30-20 this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle is Big 12 matchup, West Virginia and Kansas State. Last 2 games have been decided by a total of 2 points. West Virginia picked up this game last year in Morgantown, 17-16 2 years ago in 2015. Kansas State did win a 24-23 matchup. You look at West Virginia, they're coming off a very gutty home win, 20-16 over Iowa State. I was on West Virginia. They jumped out to a 20-3 first half lead before holding on 20-16, but they did not disappoint from an offensive perspective. They rushed for 208 yards on the ground. They passed for 316 through the air, but more importantly, held Iowa State's offense to only 104 rushing yards in last week's matchup. You look at the offense for West Virginia entering this ballgame. They're a balanced offense. They're rushing for 166 yards on the ground, passing for 349 yards through the air, and in my opinion, have the better quarterback in Will Grier that's completing 65% of his passes, 3,068 yards, 30 passing touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He's going up against a Kansas State defense that's allowing 295 passing yards per game. But more importantly, over the last 3 games against Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas Tech, that defense has allowed 400 passing yards in 3 straight to those opponents. I think it carries through this weekend against a high-octane offense in West Virginia. More importantly, you look at Kansas State's offense, they're rushing for right around 184 yards per game, passing for 193 yards through the air with Alex Delton. But I think West Virginia could dictate the tempo, jump up early on Kansas State, force Kansas State to match them score for score. And I like the defense of West Virginia as well. Even though statistically it looks like they're giving up 199 rushing yards per game, I still like their ability to force Kansas State to methodically work down the field, and I do feel that they get a convincing 17-point victory on the road in Manhattan. I just think West Virginia is the more complete team. They get a convincing 37-20 win over Kansas State. this coming Saturday. Let's keep it in the ACC. It's going to be very ACC heavy the rest of the way. We got a big ACC battle between Virginia and Louisville. Virginia got a gutty home win over Georgia Tech to become bowl eligible. Great job by Bronco Mendenhall and the crew. He's preached a physicality on the offensive and defensive lines. They held Georgia Tech in check last week from a rushing offense. They allowed 220 yards on the ground. That was a Georgia Tech offense that entering that matchup was rushing for 372 yards on the ground entering that ball game. So that was a solid effort. Now they face a high-powered offense in Louisville that's coming out of a bye week. Louisville sitting at 5-4. They've had an extra week of preparation and haven't looked good this year at home. They're coming off a loss 2 weeks ago in Wake Forest. They lost that matchup 42-32 and gave up over 625 total yards of offense to John Wolford and the Demon Deacons. You look at Virginia on the road now. They won this ball game. They lost this ball game 32-25 last year in Charlottesville. They were able to keep Lamar Jackson in check, but I think this is a bad matchup after facing the triple option to face a mobile quarterback in Lamar Jackson that's going to put pressure on the edge of the perimeter of their defense. More importantly, you look at Virginia from an offensive perspective in third down conversions over the last couple of games now. Virginia hasn't been able to convert on third downs. They've only converted 10 of 34 third down conversions, which is only 29%, going up against a balanced offense in Louisville that's rushing for 216 yards on the ground, passing for 333 through the air with one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in college football in Lamar Jackson. He's completing 60% of his passes, 2,808 yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He's also rushed for 1,029 yards on the ground and 14 rushing touchdowns. I think the week off of preparation will benefit Louisville. They're looking to become bowl eligible, and I think they get a convincing 41-21 victory over Virginia. Expect a little bit of a letdown now that Virginia's bowl eligible. They can relax the pressures off. I know they might play loose, but I think it favors Louisville in this matchup after facing the triple option. Louisville does get a convincing 20-point home win over Virginia this coming weekend. Notre Dame and Miami, classic top 10 battle. Number 3, Notre Dame did not disappoint. They dominated Wake Forest 48-37, although Wake Forest did get a last-second touchdown to make that game a lot closer. They were able to pass for 348 yards on Notre Dame secondary. That's given up 242 passing yards heading into this matchup against Miami. You look at Notre Dame's offense, still a one-dimensional offense. They're rushing for 324 yards on the ground, passing for 170 through the air with Brandon Wimbush that's still only completing 51% of his passes, going up against a very experienced Miami secondary that's only allowing 197 passing yards per game, but they came through with a rock-solid, dominating home performance against Josh Jackson. They forced 2 interceptions last week and did record 4 total sacks. This is an defense in Miami over the last 3 games now that has forced 9 interceptions over the last 3 games. They do have 28 total sacks through 8 games on the year. I like this matchup against Brandon Wimbush. They're going to force Brandon Wimbush to beat them over the top, and I think that's the difference in this ballgame. They faced Josh Jackson last week, a mobile quarterback. They were able to contain him in the pocket, look for the same type of game plan by Miami's defense this coming weekend. You look at Miami's offense, they're a balanced offense that's rushing for 173 yards on the ground, passing for 287 through the air. More importantly, Malik Rozier did step up. He's completing 56% of his passes, 2,264 passing yards, 19 touchdowns heading into this ball game. Miami's plus 11 in turnover margin. They're playing at home. To me, that's the difference. They get a very hard-fought 27-20 home win over Notre Dame this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle is another ACC battle, NC State, Boston College. NC State lost last week at home. They played all out against the top-ranked Clemson Tigers. They lost that matchup 38-31. They now have had a really tough back-to-back stretch against Notre Dame and Clemson. They allowed 318 rushing yards against Notre Dame. They allowed 224 in last week's home loss to the Clemson Tigers. You look at Ryan Finley over the last couple of games, he threw 3 interceptions, and more importantly, over the last 4 games for NC State, this is their 3rd road game against Boston College in Chestnut Hill. Boston College is sitting at 5-4. They're looking to become bowl eligible. They've had an extra week of preparation. They won this ball game 21-14 last year in Raleigh. They forced a low-scoring game. I think they could do the same thing this coming weekend. They're averaging 199 rushing yards per game. A.J. Dillon leads that team with 843 rushing yards. And more importantly, they're +5 in turnover margin heading into this ballgame. I think they could force some turnovers against Ryan Finley. Over the last couple of weeks, even though he's played solid competition, he's turned the ball over. I think that continues on the road. And from an emotional factor, where is NC State heading into this ballgame? They've had a tough 2-game stretch. Now go on the road to face a blue-collar team in Boston College. I think Boston College does get a 31-21 home win over NC State this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle is Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech. Virginia Tech lost last week 28-10 against Miami. They now go on the road to face the triple option, but Georgia Tech is coming off a disappointing road loss to Virginia. You look at Virginia Tech offensively, they're a balanced offense. They're averaging 177 rushing yards on the ground. They're passing for 258 through the air. But in terms of their defense, this is a defense that is still solid in run support, holding opposing offenses to only 122 rushing yards on the ground. They can run sideline to sideline, and third down defense is still rock solid. They're holding opposing offenses to only 24% on third down conversions. You look at Georgia Tech heading into this ballgame, they've dipped a little in terms of rushing offense. They're only averaging 331 rushing yards per game, and they're only averaging 83 passing yards per game. More importantly, third down conversions for Georgia Tech over the last 3 games now, 9 of 32 on third down conversions. You look at Georgia Tech's defense overall. They entered this ballgame giving up 206 passing yards to opposing offenses, but over the last 4 games, they seem to be getting stretched vertically. They've allowed 256 passing yards per game, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I just think Virginia Tech is a more complete offense. They forced Georgia Tech out of their game plan, much the way Virginia did. They lost this ballgame, Virginia Tech did, at home last year to Georgia Tech, 30-20. They're not going to take this game lightly. I think Georgia Tech seems, in my opinion, to be getting worn out by the schedule. I like Virginia Tech to get a gutty road win. I think they are able to put up 34 points. They get a 34-21 victory over Georgia Tech in this ballgame. Look for Josh Jackson to bounce back in a big way, and they do get a 13-point victory over the Yellow Jackets this coming Saturday. Last game is a Big 12 battle. It is Texas Tech and Baylor. Texas Tech is coming off a disappointing home loss to Kansas State. This is a team now that is 1-5 in the Big 12 this year, has lost now, Texas Tech has, 4 straight Big 12 games. More importantly, since over the last 3.5 years, Texas Tech is 10-23 in Big 12 play. And a lot of people think this is like an elite team in the Big 12. They haven't stepped up. In my opinion, Cliff Kingsbury is on the hot seat. And they're facing a Baylor team that is still playing hard for their head coach, Matt Rhule. They got a convincing victory over Kansas. Yes, it was Kansas. I understand that. But they were able to pass for 337 yards last week. And you look at that quarterback, Charlie Brewer. He's completing 67% of his passes. 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. I'll say this. Both of these teams are equally matched. Even though Baylor's 1-8, they're a better team than that. They've played Oklahoma tough this year. They played West Virginia tough at home. Texas Tech, in my opinion, is not an elite team in the Big 12. They're 1-5 against conference opponents. Baylor, in my opinion, has the better coach in Matt Rhule. And I'll take them. I think they get this victory over Texas Tech. I think it's high scoring. Let's put a 55-48 victory Baylor gets the outright victory over Texas Tech, hands Cliff Kingsbury his 6th loss in the conference this coming Saturday. Follow the radio show each and every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific, Fantasy Sports Radio Network. That's FNTSY /radio. Or you could go to Fantasy Sports Network Television, 9 to 12, Optimum or Cablevision Systems, or Dish Channel 262 every Saturday morning, 9 to 12 Eastern, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific. Follow it each and every Saturday. College football is the best. Enjoy the games. I just love talking about it. Have a great weekend, everyone.